Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Live Show, Week 14 game-by-game preview edition. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great. And yeah, it's a great day to go through 14 games, giving you one cool tidbit along the way for each and every team involved. As always, to accomplish this task, I am joined by the one, the only, Matthew Freedman, who is not shoveling snow in Texas. Must be nice.
Yeah, it's not bad. We still had to deal with, like 50-degree weather a couple of days ago. It was really annoying. How are things weather-wise in your neck of the woods?
I had to go out yesterday for the first time this year and go ahead and move that snow from my driveway to the grass. Dogs are not happy about it. I'm not particularly thrilled about it either. I guess it looks pretty enough, but snow is overrated, man. Like, can we just get flamethrowers to take care of this already?
That sounds like a Elon Musk type of situation. In fact, I'm pretty sure at one point he did have a company that created flamethrowers. Maybe just get one of those.
I missed out. So if anyone out there has a good hookup for a flamethrower, me and my fellow Ohioans could use it, but I guess we got some more important stuff to worry about. Before that, again, we're breaking down each and every Week 14 matchup today here on the Fantasy Live Show. And accordingly, let's get things started with our DraftKings opening lines. It is Wednesday afternoon for us here. We appreciate everyone hanging out with us live, but accordingly, we do have some news to get to before we get to breaking down each and every matchup, starting with some quarterback. Actually, good news. Lamar Jackson is indeed practicing to start the week. That is the first time that has been the case in 3 weeks. So not saying he's fully healthy, but maybe he is starting to get things a little bit more squared away. Meanwhile, Justin Herbert not practicing, not ruled out for Monday night. And Deshaun Watson actually had his practice window open. Remains to be seen if he's actually going to be playing football this year or not. But with Lamar Jackson, Freedman, I ranked him as my QB7 this week. There's guys like Jared Goff I have behind him where I could certainly see dropping Lamar further. How low was too low for you to go with Lamar this week?
Man, it's interesting because for years he was in that clear upper tier. And then now I have him at the top of the third tier. So he's not even in the Hurts, Goff, Burrow, Mahomes tier for me this week. He's a tier underneath that. And it really just has to do with the running ability. I think it's encouraging that we've seen Lamar open practice for the week, but that still isn't enough for me to move him back up to where we previously had him. I'm going to need to see him actually have rushing production on the field before he is basically ranked like Lamar Jackson.
The good news is that despite the lack of rushing upside, he still has been throwing the ball relatively well. I know he's missed some open guys. We all saw that last Thursday night, but 8.1 yards per attempt, guys. That is the third highest mark in the NFL. Certainly has a good enough matchup through the air, at least coming up this Sunday against the Steelers. Meanwhile, in the running back streets, we do have a handful of DMPs that are new. Kyle Monangai dealing with an ankle. Trey Benson still not out there on the field. Dylan Sampson with a calf, and Alvin Kamara with his knee and ankle injury. That said, Marshawn Lloyd back from the West Coast. Apparently, he is feeling good enough to get into limited practice. Does that really matter for us? No, but you know what? It is good to see Marshawn Lloyd just maybe finally getting over that injury bug. Over in the wide receiver streets, we do have, again, a handful of DMPs. Amon-Ra St. Brown this entire week has not practiced. That said, he is questionable for Thursday night. Freedman, we'll see what happens. Hopefully, Rap Sheet or someone lets us know Thursday morning, but I'm cautiously, thinking that he is not going to be playing.
Yeah, I'm not even cautious about it. I'm super skeptical. Normally, if a dude doesn't practice all week and he's listed as questionable, 95% of the time he doesn't play. And those other times it's the kind of thing to where it's like a veteran, like an offensive lineman where you just know he's not practicing, but he is playing. That is not the case with Amon-Ra St. Brown, who did suffer the ankle injury last week. So I'm really skeptical that we end up seeing him this week, and we're going to talk more about that later.
Khalif Raymond also already rolled out. So yes, the Isaac TeSlaas and Tom Kennedys of the world we will be touching on here shortly. Also know Drake London not practicing still with his knee injury. He's considered day-to-day, but perhaps on the wrong side of that questionable tag ahead of Sunday. Also Roman Dunze dealing with a foot injury. He had a different injury. I think it was an ankle previous weeks and wound up, returning to practice and playing just fine. So wouldn't be too worried just yet. But this was something that, again, was not listed the last couple of weeks. Also Marvin Harrison Jr. with the heel injury, not practicing, nor are Parker Washington Hampton or Josh Palmer. Good news, guys, in the limited fashion, we actually have Mike Evans returning to practice from that collarbone. Our fearless leader here at Fantasy Life, Matthew Berry, actually was saying today that he went out and looked on some of his waiver wires, did find Mike Evans in some of those leagues with the more shallow benches. So again, a situation where maybe he's still buried down there in the ranks because his projection isn't updated. You could do worse than picking up Mike Evans ahead of his potential return. Also, Jalen McMillan potentially, could be back sooner rather than later. He was limited while recovering from his neck injury. T. Higgins limited to start the week in the concussion protocol. That is a good sign. Wouldn't guarantee he's back just yet. Again, still in the concussion protocol, but certainly making steps in the right direction. And also know Jaden Reed and Matthew Golden are limited for the Packers. If one of them returns, it's going to be tougher to get excited about Dontavian Wicks. Finally, at tight end, Dalton Kincaid back in a limited fashion ahead of the smash matchup of smash matchups, Freedman. How would you be ranking Dalton Kincaid if he is active against the Bengals?
Certainly top 5 and maybe like number 3, number 4. The annoying thing with Kincaid is that he doesn't really get much volume this year, but he's still been super efficient. And I am slightly encouraged thinking that he will play. Last week, limited practice all week, questionable, ended up not playing. But the Bills have kind of had this pattern with a number of players this year where they will have them limited an entire week, they won't play, and then the next week those guys will play. So I think that's the trajectory that we are on with Dalton Kincaid. So optimistically, I think we see him.
I'm kind of torn between maybe we could see more pass game volume because it is Bills Bengals. I mean, Joe Burrow perhaps, has a lot of touchdowns. We see a shootout occur, but on the other side is the Bengals defense that can't really stop the run, Freeman. So maybe the Bills can still, participate in a shootout without feeding Kincaid. But I'm with you. He has made the most out of his opportunities. Definitely would be, I think, at worst, tight end 5, tight end 6, if healthy enough to go. And then finally, guys, that Chiefs offensive line very, very banged up to the point where left tackle first rounder Josh Simmons, unfortunately going to IR with a wrist injury. Several other guys banged up. Not exactly the situation you want to be in ahead of their Sunday night matchup against that ferocious Houston Texans front seven. So with all that said, guys, let's get into the matchups. This has been our DraftKings opening lines. But first, a quick word to our friends at DraftKings. I've teamed up with DraftKings Sportsbook to bring you the best way to get in on the action this NBA season. Right now, new customers who bet just $5 will get $200 in bonus bets if your bet wins. That's right, new customers bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if your bet wins. All you have to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using the promo code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. Hey, you can use your bonus bets on same-game parlays, player props, money line spreads, and more, or stay in on the action with live betting that brings every single play to life. So here's your play. New customers turn $5 into $200 if your bet wins, paid out in bonus bets. The crown is yours. Thanks to DraftKings Sportsbook for sponsoring this. Let's make this NBA season one to remember. Note that minimum minus 500 odds are required. We are breaking down every Week 14 matchup here on the Fantasy Life Show, starting with the highest game total all the way down to the worst. So we really are saving the worst for last here. But again, every NFL matchup, regardless of the game total, is important here in Fantasy Land. But we're going to kick things off with Thursday Night Football. We got the Lions hosting the Cowboys, Detroit 3-point home favorites. Game total all the way up there at 54. So look, with the Cowboys, if you have Dak, if you have Javonte, Pickens, CD, you're starting them. Jake Ferguson too. So I did just want to say, Malik Davis, guys, he is one of these kind of more under the radar Cowboys where we actually perhaps could help your team down the stretch run. Because again, when we are trying to just have those handy dandy handcuffs sitting on our bench, he is one where he's actually available in far more leagues than not. In fact, when I was looking earlier in the week, Yahoo actually had him at a 0% rostership. So I'm aware that he is on a few teams out there, but again, he really is down there with the Keaton Mitchells of the world as available in far more leagues than not. And God forbid something would happen to Javonte Williams, guys. Not saying it's guaranteed that Malik Davis would instantly be the RB1. Maybe we would see Jaden Blue find his way out of the doghouse and stuff. But again, in this Cowboys offense, 15 to 20 touches for anyone really will go a long way. So top 4 handcuffs I would like stashed on my bench: Blake Corum, Brian Robinson, Bashaw Tootin, and Tyler Algier. But again, they're already on benches in more leagues than not. So don't sleep on someone like Malik Davis, perhaps making a difference down the stretch. Freeman, looking at those banged up Lions, again, going to be a situation where perhaps we see volume condensed if and when Amon-Ra St. Brown actually is ruled out.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of this offense is going to flow through Jahmyr Gibbs. And I mean, it's obvious you have Jahmyr Gibbs, you're starting him. But in terms of like the rankings, the projections, I feel like he's got to be very close to the top, if not at the top. The matchup with the Cowboys isn't quite as good now as it used to be. The addition of Quinnen Williams, you've had DeMarvion Overshown return. And so not as good of a matchup, but still, Jahmyr Gibbs, since head coach Dan Campbell took over offensive play calling duties 4 games ago, he has 668 yards and 6 touchdowns on a 94 utilization score. And again, no Amon-Ra St. Brown, no Khalif Raymond, no Sam Laporta, no Brock Wright. So much of the offense could go through Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, it could legit be like 30 opportunities that he gets in this game. The Lions have the league's best home field advantage over the past 5 years. And at home with quarterback Jared Goff, they're 27-15-1 against the spread. Great situation for Jahmyr Gibbs. And then also, you mentioned it, Isaac TeSlaa. I mean, so much of the opportunities he has in front of him. No Raymond, no Amon-Ra St. Brown. He had a season high 92% snap rate last week. For the season, he's been efficient, 9.1 yards per target. He should be added on waivers. Like, you're not playing him in guillotine leagues or something like that, but in your deeper leagues, dynasty leagues, whatever it is, DFS, TeSlaa really stands out to me as someone who has an opportunity.
Wide receiver 41 in our consensus fantasy life ranks that is ahead of guys like DJ Moore, Darnell Mooney, Trey Tucker, amongst others. Moving right along, we got the Bills hosting the Bengals. Buffalo 6-point home favorites, game total of 52.5. And I did want to look at this Bengals team and just ask, like, what do we do if T. Higgins is out? Because if he's in, it's pretty simple. Chase Brown, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase, we're feeling good there. But again, it's not exactly a guarantee that he will clear the concussion protocol in time. I think the answer is Mitchell Tinsley, although I don't feel good about it this week as I did last. We did actually the Bengals embrace more 2 tight end sets, which unfortunately not only moved down Tinsley's overall route rate, but also really got Mike Gesicki out of the equation. So Gesicki more or less playing on kind of a big slot role anyway, but unfortunately in that game with Jamar Chase out, we saw, a near 70% route rate, but last week it was all the way back down to about 40%. So can't really trust Gesicki. Andre Yoshibas, yes, he actually did play a 96% route rate last week, but only had 2 targets to show for it. Happened to get a touchdown that just was, again, one of the better throws of the week from Joe Burrow. So good stuff there. And I wish, again, I had some, super great sleeper here, but at the end of the day, I think it's going to be Burrow, probably force feeding Jamar Chase, 15 targets out there, and the running backs really just being the only other guys to feel at all good about in fantasy land. So Mitchell Tinsley, more of a wide receiver 5 with guys like Pat Bryant, Tez Johnson, and Keon Coleman, if you are into that sort of thing. Freedman on to those Buffalo Bills. Again, hopefully we do get Dalton Kincaid back, but otherwise, let's face it, it's this run game that we should be getting excited about.
Yeah, I mean, James Cook, we talk on the Chop podcast about in-game players, and James Cook, to me, he's an in-game running back. Like, I think of him as a top 5 running back in the NFL right now. And I mean, you see it in the production. In 6 games since the week 7 bye, he has 838 yards, 4 touchdowns on 124 carries and 15 targets. He should see sustained work as a 6-point favorite, and the Bengals are going to be without all-pro edge Trey Hendrickson once again. And then, of course, the flow chart matchup with Dalton Kincaid. Basically, anyone who plays tight end and is going against the Bengals, it's just like, okay, yes, bump him up the rankings. So I think we get him back. And as I mentioned, he hasn't had more than, I think, 6 targets in any game this year, but he has been incredibly efficient this year, like elite in his efficiency, 12.4 yards per target and 11.1% touchdown rate. It helps that he's being targeted down the field and in the end zone. If you just look at all the pass catchers on the team, like, he's the number 1 pass catcher on the team. So the Bills, number 1 in implied team total at 28.75 points. I think there's plenty of room in this offense for Cook and Kincaid to go off, given that they are going against the Bengals.
It is wild with Kincaid. I mean, I've joked about, Puka Nacua and JSN like breaking some of these efficiency charts with just how high in the top right corner they are. Like, that is Kincaid with the tight ends this year. We just haven't seen the counting numbers to, make it as big of a deal with the mainstream media. But here on the Fantasy Life Show, we appreciate you, Dalton Kincaid. Moving right along, guys, we got the Cardinals hosting the Rams. LA sitting as 8-point road faves, though. Game total at 48.5. So looking at the Cardinals, again, seeing Marvin Harrison Jr. just as banged up as he was down the stretch of that last last game and now starting off the week with the DMP, it does seem realistic to believe that he could be out. So if that is the case, where will we be ranking Michael Wilson and even Greg Dortch? And I think the answer, at least for Wilson, is quite high because remember, guys, in weeks 11 and 12 without Marv, we saw 33 targets for Michael Wilson. He went ahead and posted wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 9 finishes. Greg Dortch, though, only 15 targets. He scored twice, but wide receiver 12 and wide receiver 13 finishes. That happened. No, we can't get quite as excited about our one true short king because, again, those targets matter and we can't be necessarily expecting those touchdowns each and every week. But again, I do think without Marv, Michael Wilson, I could go as high as wide receiver 13 just behind guys like A.J. Brown and Chris Olave. No lower, though, than wide receiver 21 where I have Marv. The real battle is going to be Michael Wilson versus Justin Jefferson. I've gone back and forth in my head on it all week long. I'm not going to make a decision right now. I'll save that one for the ranking show, but that really is how highly we think of Michael Wilson without Marv. Meanwhile, Greg Dortch, I'd have him around wide receiver 38 with guys like Huel, Isaac TeSlaa, A.D. Mitchell, and more. Freedman looking at the Rams, coming off a game where, again, kind of unanimously considered, I thought, the front runners of the NFC got taken back to earth a little bit against those Carolina Panthers. So it seems like a reasonable bounce back spot for their stars who've been pretty great for us in fantasy regardless.
Yeah. So Blake Corum, just want to give a quick shout out to him. You mentioned him earlier. This is basically just a reminder. He's one of the best handcuffs in fantasy. If Kyren Williams were to suffer an injury, even in guillotine leagues, I think Corum would be someone that immediately you would think of as a high-end, reliable fantasy starter. If he's available on waivers, he should be added. And since the week 8 bye, he actually has more goal line opportunities than Kyren Williams. So he's not like just a handcuff. He's actually someone who has some real viable value. And then speaking of like goal line opportunities, Davante Adams, like this is unreal. Like even thinking of like running backs, he might be the best bet any given week to score a touchdown in the NFL. Since the bye, 5 games, 8 touchdowns is what he has. An NFL high 14 receiving touchdowns on the year. He's not getting there in yardage. This will be the first time since 2019 Adams doesn't hit the 1,000 yard mark for the season unless he has just like a really strong run of games to close the year. But it doesn't matter because at the goal line, he is just being targeted at an unreal rate. And then you look at the matchup. The Cardinals could be without cornerback Max Melton, and they're number 30 in defensive dropback success rate. It just feels like another situation where it's like, Davante Adams, you're probably just assuming he scores a touchdown this week. The real question is, does he get a second one?
14 touchdowns for Davante after 13 weeks of action. Freedman, only 3 other wide receivers have pulled this off since 2000. Randy Moss, Terrell Owens. Can you name the only other one? 2010, and he plays in the AFC.
No, I don't even want to hazard a guess.
Dwayne freaking Bowe in the year 2025. Shout out to the legendary Kansas City Chief. I know I'm Drake and joshing around there, but still a heck of a year from Dwayne Bowe and certainly from Davante Adams this year. So way more Dwayne Bowe related tidbits on the way, ladies and mostly gentlemen. Don't you forget it. That said, we do want to give a quick shout out to our friends over at Huel. Hey guys, if you don't know who Huel is, well, you are freaking missing out because they produce no prep, fast, nutritious, plant-based meals that don't compromise your health. Huel has 2 meal replacement products in particular that have really been helping me avoid skipping meals or feel bad about eating something quick and crappy during the day. Their ready-to-drink options include all sorts of tasty flavors. Personally, I have been loving their iced coffee option because as someone with a crippling coffee addiction, once I'm done drinking coffee, I still want to try to have something that's similar to it. And this manages to accomplish both those goals. And honestly, just again, not only is it tasty, but I've been pleasantly surprised at how full I've managed to stay hours after drinking it. These include 36 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber, 27 essential vitamins and minerals, no added sugar, also gluten-free, and guys, under $5 per meal and ready to go in this economy, no less. How can you not love that? And there's also this green daily drink, which for someone like me who despises the existence of vegetables, really is a game changer. And again, that gives you the ability to stay healthy, but also be quick about it. We got things to do, fancy lineups to set after all. These actually are developed by registered nutritionists and dietitians. They include 42 vitamins, minerals, and superfoods. Only 25 calories. Need that during the holiday season. 4 grams of fiber and just 1 single gram of sugar. So yeah, guys, Huel makes healthy eating simple. They also just launched the Target stores nationwide. You can try both products today with 15% off your purchase for new customers with my exclusive code FantasyLife. Just go to www.huel.com/fantasylife. Again, use that Fantasy Life code and fill out the post-checkout survey to help support the show. www.huel.com/fantasylife. We're breaking down each and every Week 14 matchup here on the Fantasy Life Show. Continuing on with the Jaguars hosting the Colts. Indy's sitting as 1.5-point road favorite still. Game total of 47.5. So looking at those Colts, guys, I think the clock has started to strike midnight on Daniel Jones' Cinderella 2025 story. Of course, the broken fibula is playing a factor in this, but seriously, looking at his last few performances, we have seen 4 of his 5 worst games in terms of EPA per dropback come in his last, 4 games. So it just has not been a smooth situation for him. I do think it's injury related, but that's not something we exactly expect to go away anytime soon. Specifically, since that injury got diagnosed over these last 2 games, we've seen his average target depth drop from 8.4 to 6.3. He's getting the ball out in nearly a quarter of a second faster, and the rushing guys has pretty much disappeared. So not saying he's completely unstartable. Honestly, given all this, I was surprised still at how well he kind of managed to play against that, again, just super freaking feisty Houston Texans front 7 last week. So he comes in as my QB 16, still ahead of guys like Trevor Lawrence, CJ Stroud, and Tyrod Taylor. But if you do have a Sam Darnold, Caleb Williams, Marcus Mariota, or God forbid, Toyota-thon Jordan Love, I would prefer to start them ahead of Daniel Jones at this point. Meanwhile, Freeman, looking at those Jacksonville Jaguars, Brian Thomas Jr. is back, which is great, but I don't know. It's weird. I think we feel better about some other pass catchers anyway.
Yeah, Brian Thomas hasn't looked like the number 1 wide receiver this year. He didn't look like one last week when he returned to action. And then Parker Washington, the number 3 wide receiver, has been pretty good, but he's dealing with a hip injury. I'm skeptical that he is out. So that means good things for Jacoby Myers and Brenton Strange. And, after the trade from the Raiders to the Jags, it took a couple of weeks for Myers really to become a full-time player. But over the past 2 weeks, he's had a full-time role. He's had 140 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns on a 93% route rate, 24% target share. The Colts are number 5 in largest fantasy boosts allowed to wide receivers. And then cornerback Sauce Gardner is all but certain to be out with a calf injury. And then Brenton Strange, since he returned from injury 2 games ago, he's looked really good, 138 yards and a receiving touchdown on 9 targets. He's had back-to-back top 5 fantasy finishes. And then the Colts, number 4 in most fantasy points allowed to tight ends. It's a good setup for Jacoby Myers and Brenton Strange, and I would not have expected that entering the season.
Strange in particular getting a real nice boost in our Fantasy Life ranks. The tight end 7 overall, only behind Kincaid, Ferguson, Kelsey, Warren, Bowers, and McBride. Moving right along, we got the Packers hosting the number 1 seed Chicago Bears. What a time to be alive. This one is in Lambeau and has Green Bay sitting at 6.5-point favorites. Game total down there at 44.5. So looking at the Bears, I just wanted to ask, can we actually overly rely on any of these pass catchers? And unfortunately, guys, I think the answer is no. Just looking at their total ranks, in PPR points per game, since returning from their Week 5 bye, we got Roma Dunze as the wide receiver 55. DJ Moore is the highest scoring one at wide receiver 37. Luther Burden all the way down there at wide receiver 78. So he's seen his role increase a little bit more recently, but still haven't exactly gotten that boom we were hoping for. And the same sentiment is true for their other highly drafted rookie, Colson Loveland, who again just can't fully separate from Cole Kmet. We've seen just a 62% route rate over the course of these last 4 weeks once Cole Kmet was back in the lineup. So again, unfortunate, but really it's just his backfield I think that we should be paying the most attention to. DeAndre Swift will be a must-start running back if Kyle Monangai is eventually ruled out. Otherwise, both guys more so in that low-end RB2 range. Before we go to Freeman, though, for the Packers, I did want to shout out this cool stat I saw from Front Office NFL. This season, guys, Caleb Williams has the lowest completion rate among qualified quarterbacks. That would make him the first QB to rank last in that and have his team earn the number 1 overall seed since seeding actually began in 1975. The last quarterback to even be in the bottom 5 and earn the number 1 seed was Rex Grossman in 2006 for the Chicago Bears. Team of destiny, people are wondering. Freeman, again, Packers trying to play spoiler here at home, and they might have the dogs to do it on offense, specifically Josh Jacobs and Christian Watson, looking like the 2 top players here in Fantasyland.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think both of these guys benefit from having that extra time coming off of the Thanksgiving game last week. So Jacobs should benefit with the 3 extra days of rest, and his return to action last week, 91 yards on 17 carries and a target. And then Matt LaFleur, he's just been great at home with the Packers. 36-23 against the spread is their record. And then the Bears in their front 7 are looking extremely thin, especially at linebacker. Tremaine Edmonds, TJ Edwards, Noah Sewell, Noah Sewell, and then Ruben Hippolyte. All of those guys could be out. And looking at the game model, I just think that even though 44.5 points is where we have the total setting for this, we have the over projected as a 5-star bet. I'm expecting a lot of points specifically from the Packers, and that also feeds into Christian Watson. And his 6 games with the team this year, he's just really clearly been the number one wide receiver, and increasingly it's gone in that direction. Now, number one on the team with a 78% route rate, 20% target share, 42% share of the air yards, which he's turned into 363 yards and 3 touchdowns receiving. You mentioned Matthew Golden might still be out. Of course, Jalen Reed is not certain to return. And then the Bears could be without cornerback Tyreek Stevenson, who's dealing with a hip injury. So I just think it's a Packers game, and I am sorry about that for all the Bears fans.
Add it all together, and we got Christian Watson as the wide receiver 18 in our consensus fantasy life ranks, as ahead of guys like Courtland Sutton, Terry McLaurin, Michael Pittman, and more. Moving right along, we got the Falcons hosting the Seahawks. Seattle still 7.5-point road phase, game total at 44. So I want to try to see, could Atlanta's defense help cause some more problems for Sam Darnold that, let's face it, have arose over the course of these last few weeks. He was fine against the Titans 2 weeks ago, but man, those Rams games, and then also what we saw in that revenge special against the Vikings, really did bring out some of the worst that we've seen from Darnold. In fact, those were his 2 worst games of the year in yards per attempt, 2 of his 3 worst games in terms of EPA per dropback. So I will say, after digging into it, though, I didn't see a big sign. I was kind of thinking that based on last week, again, blitz heavy Brian Flores, Minnesota Vikings, maybe that was what was screwing with Sam Darnold. Maybe he's been facing more pressure in the second half of the year, but it really hasn't been the case. I think more than anything, just when he has faced the toughest defenses, we've accordingly seen him have his worst passing performances. Funny how that works. But yeah, when you do look at the 4 times this year where Darnold has kind of been at his most mortal, they've come in week 1 against the 49ers when they actually still had all their great defenders healthy. They came against the Houston Texans, and then again against the Rams and the Vikings. So again, just an unfortunate thing where I think that's kind of the spot where we've seen this offense struggle, because yeah, as much as JSN is incredible and deserves to be ranked as a top 3 fantasy wide receiver, there's only so much he can do against truly great defenses. I do not think the Falcons qualify, so feel good about, Darnold and JSN in this spot, but I do wonder if we could see, again, Darnold maybe not putting his best foot forward when things start to matter more in January. Freeman, looking at those Falcons again, sounds like Drake London could be on the wrong side of questionable, so wheels up for Darnell Mooney and maybe even Kyle Pitts.
Yeah, I think so. As you mentioned, London hasn't practiced this week. He didn't practice or play over the past 2 weeks. And in his absence, Mooney had a 95% route rate, 37% share of the air yards, and a 50% share of the end zone targets. His 99 receiving yards and a touchdown on that usage, that doesn't look really good, but Mooney has the potential to go off. And I think the same is true for Kyle Pitts. 107 yards on 13 targets with a 91% route rate is what he's had over the past 2 weeks without Drake London. The Seahawks are number 29 in defensive pass DVOA against tight ends. It's not like I feel great about starting anyone in a Falcons offense that is led at this point by Kirk Cousins, but with no Drake London there to dominate targets, Mooney and Pitts do have upside potential.
And honestly, I think Pitts is kind of fit with Cousins almost better than Penix. Cousins at this point in his career, much more inclined just to get rid of the ball quickly. And they've been using Pitts more so as like his check down option here in recent weeks. And he's honestly made the most out of those. So good for the former number 4 overall pick. Moving on, we got the Ravens hosting the Steelers. Baltimore 6-point home favorites, game total of 43.5. And I did want to look at the Steelers and just say, how high is too high to rank Jaylen Warren? Because again, just in terms of what he's done with the football in his hands this year, guys, it's been pretty freaking awesome. Only Bucky Irving has actually forced more missed tackles per touch than Mr. Jaylen Warren. We also did see his usage start to bend a little bit more in his favor in week 13, following a week 12 action that had Kenneth Gainwell, making it more of a 50-50 split. So I don't want to get too carried away, but it is a situation where I think Warren deserves to be in that top 20 alongside guys like Kamani Vidal if there's no Omarion Hampton, or even if Omarion Hampton is back, next to someone like Omarion Hampton, I would start him ahead of the Seahawks and the Bears running backs, guys who, again, I think are in a bit more of a 50-50 split at this point. So I will say this Ravens run D schedule matters, but man, they have really fixed themselves. Weeks 1 through 6, guys, the Ravens were 32nd in EPA allowed per design run. Weeks 8 through 13, first. Worst to first, the Baltimore Ravens run D, man, really have been a lot better. Freeman, looking at those Ravens again, kind of already talked about Lamar Jackson a little bit in the intro. So feed me some goodness, man, on Derrick Henry and maybe Zay Flowers. Can we get our first touchdown since week 1 already?
Yeah, I mean, Zay Flowers, we might need to wait for that touchdown for a while longer. But Derrick Henry, this is a Derrick Henry spot. In 6 games since the Week 8 bye, he has 590 yards and 6 touchdowns. He should be fresh with the 3 extra days of rest off of the Thanksgiving game last week. The Steelers are number 28 in defensive rush EPA, and they might be without defensive tackle Derek Harmon and linebacker Patrick Queen. Like, this is the Derrick Henry smash spot. Like, D. Hember starts now. And then Zay Flowers, massively disappointed last week. Just 6 yards receiving, obviously no touchdown, but he had 7 targets. In his 8 other games this year with quarterback Lamar Jackson, he has 614 yards on 53 targets and 7 carries. The Steelers are number 4 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, and cornerback James Pierre is dealing with a concussion. I doubt that he plays. So both of these guys have like an edge going in their direction. I'm less optimistic on Zay Flowers. It's a good setup for him, but I think it's a absolute smash for Derrick Henry.
You know what freaking blows my mind, though, Freeman? Zay Flowers has the 3rd most receiving yards of any wide receiver in the AFC. How? How is that even a thing? I don't know, man. I don't know. He did have a touchdown get overturned on what I thought was a pretty iffy OPI. But again, I'm a very biased Zay Flowers believer. So take that for what you will. Moving right along, guys. Moving right along in a minute, because I did want to give a quick shout out to our friends at Mike's Hard Lemonade. Guys, one of the best deals that you can ever find in the history of fantasy football podcasts is brought to you by Mike's Hard Lemonade, because as much as, athletes, coaches, even college players, they're getting that bag on huge endorsement deals. But what about the hardest working people in fantasy football? That's right, guys. Mike's Hard Lemonade, the brand for people who go hard, is launching the first ever fantasy commissioner endorsement deal. If you've been freaking grinding your fantasy league, dealing with all the madness in the group chat, well, you actually have now a chance to make some money for your contributions. You can nominate your commissioner for an MVP level endorsement package, including a potential $25,000 signing bonus. Also can have a custom championship style lemon ring, a black Letterman jacket with Mike's patches and their name across the back. And again, $25,000 signing bonus. How cool is that? So, hey, if you think your commissioner deserves spotlight, you can submit your nomination at Mike'sFantasyEndorsementDeal.com now through December 9th. Note that no purchase is necessary. Nominator must be 21 plus. Nominee must be 25 plus. And again, it's a situation, guys, where the winner will not be hired as an endorser, but you can see the full rules at Mike'sFantasyEndorsementDeal.com. Please drink responsibly. This is Mike's Hard Lemonade Company in Chicago, Illinois. We got some NFC North action going on with the Buccaneers hosting the Saints. Tampa Bay 8.5-point home faves, game total at 42.5. So you're looking for a DST for the rest of your fantasy season. Look no further than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, guys, because they really are the only group checking the 4 kind of, boxes that we're looking for in our DST over any particular period of time. Are they a good real life defense? Yes, this is actually the 12th ranked defense in the league in terms of EPA allowed per play. Do they actually have a good enough offense to not screw them over? Also, yes, we all believe in Baker Mayfield. And honestly, he's done a much better job this year at limiting those turnovers, just 5 interceptions after leading the league with 16 last year. Also, do we have a team that actually is playing for something, not just giving up on the season, scheduling those flights for Cancun? And yes, that is the case for the first place right now, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And lastly, that ever important schedule, which again, they just clear better than pretty much anyone else at this point. So we got the Saints this week, who ranked 28th in terms of DST fantasy points against. Then we got the Kirk Cousins-led Falcons, Panthers, and Dolphins. So again, if I have any opportunity to pick up the Tampa Bay DST for the rest of the way, I am doing so. If you're not as lucky though, and you do need more of a 1-week stream of variety, I would recommend the Chiefs, Dolphins, Commanders, and Titans in that order. They were rostered in under 25% of ESPN leagues the last time I looked. Freeman, now looking at the Saints. Honestly, I've been watching a lot of Tyler Shuck film recently. I think the guy actually might have something there. He's not, going to be the next Josh Allen. I don't think, that would be kind of hard for him to do and everything, but he's got like enough mobility and arm talent, I think, to stress the defenses pretty much at all 3 levels of the field, which accordingly could open some things up there for Devin Neal and Devon Bailey.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he turns into sort of like the best version of Davis Mills. Maybe like that would be not terrible. I mean, thinking about Devin Neal, Alvin Kamara dealing with a knee injury. I doubt he plays this week. You look at Neal as the number one running back last week. He had a nice-ish 69 yards on 14 carries and 3 targets. The production wasn't great, but at least you know he's going to get the opportunities. The matchup, obviously tough against the Buccaneers run defense, but with 4 teams on bye, a guy who's at least getting the opportunities, you could maybe do worse. And then Devon Vele, all right? So in week 10, he became a full-time player when the team traded away Rashid Shaheed. In week 12, he earned 7 targets with the deactivation of wide receiver Brandon Cooks. And then last week, he had 8 targets, turned that into 93 yards and a touchdown receiving, had a 40% share of the air yards, 33% share of the end zone targets. Vele's usage, it feels like it actually might be for real. And then the Bucs, their run defense is great. Their pass defense is suspect, number 28 in defensive dropback success rate. There might be enough opportunities here for Vele to have once again a viable, if not, really strong fantasy week.
As much as, again, I just shout out that Tampa Bay schedule, the Saints are right up there as well. So hopefully that can help Shuck, Vele, and of course, Chris Olave do their thing. I will say Chris Olave didn't practice to start this week. He has that back issue going on as well. So God forbid he's not ready for Sunday. Wheels up even more so for Mr. Vele. Moving on, we got the Vikings hosting the Commanders. J.J. McCarthy in the year 2025 is a 1.5 point home favorite. The game total is at 42. So guys, famous last words. Happy Justin Jefferson eruption week. If it's not going to happen this Sunday, I don't know if it's ever going to happen again, okay? They spent the last 2 weeks on the road in tough matchups against the Seahawks and the Packers. The Commanders this year ranked dead freaking last in EPA allowed per dropback. They're the 3rd worst defense in PPR points per game allowed to wide receivers. And they've had starting cornerbacks Trey Amos and Marshawn Lattimore on IR since the beginning of November. So I know. J.J. McCarthy, 9. He has become the meme for bad quarterback play. I feel so bad for Vikings fans. Honestly, except Thor. Sorry, bro. I love you. I love you, but you kind of, did this to yourself, all right? So I feel bad for the rest of you Vikings fans, but man, Justin Jefferson, one time. This is the matchup. Give him 15 targets, even if he only catches half. That should be enough here. So he's coming in as a top 20 wide receiver. If Justin Jefferson cannot get it done here, he'll be outside my top 24 next week, and then I'm sure he'll probably boom in that case. Freeman, looking at those Commanders, saw the return of Terry McLaurin last week. Didn't look any worse for the wear despite missing, a handful of games.
Yeah, an injury-plagued season, a lost season is what we've seen from Terry McLaurin so far. But then last week, he did ball out 96 yards and a touchdown on 14 targets. And then he has a shot to get back quarterback Jaden Daniels this week with the elbow injury. The Vikings, number 25 in defensive pass DVOA against number 1 wide receivers. And even if Jaden Daniels doesn't return this week, Marcus Mariota is good enough as the backup to facilitate production for Terry McLaurin. And then looking at Zach Ertz, even with the return of McLaurin last week, Ertz had 106 yards on 13 targets. He's the number 4 tight end on the season in air yards with a 22% share. And then the Vikings could be without free safety Theo Jackson, who's dealing with a neck injury. So McLaurin, Zach Ertz, those are the guys that I would want exposure to this week with the Commanders.
Daniels was limited in practice here on Wednesday, so a good sign for his potential to get back for Sunday. Moving on, guys, we got a Sunday night football matchup in Arrowhead. The Chiefs are hosting the Texans as 3.5 point home faves. Game totals at 41.5. So what a better time to get back to everyone's favorite segment, the Vanicream Trust Meter, because I did want to ask, hey, is Jaden Higgins someone we can trust with fantasy playoff spots on the line? I don't really think so. Okay. I'm giving him a 5 out of 10 here. All right. I'm not saying you can't start the guy in your flex spot. We're all in, have the 14 team leagues with 2 flexes, 3 wide receivers, 4 teams on bye. I get it. There's only so much someone can do, but just looking at the Texans guys, it really still is Nico Collins and everyone else. If it was Nico and Higgins and then they were rotating the rest of the guys, I could live with it, but we're still only looking at about a 60% route rate from Higgins. Unfortunately, in the year 2025, you can only score fantasy points if you are in fact on the field. So it's Kirk, Higgins, Noel, and yes, even Xavier Hutchinson really just rotating pretty evenly as the wide receivers 2 through 5. And because of that, it's tough to, again, be too excited about the rookie and a not exactly easy matchup, again, on the road going up against Steve Spagnuolo and company. So a 5 out of 10 for me. He still comes in as the fantasy life wide receiver 38. So again, that is ahead of guys like Jordan Addison, Keenan Allen, and DJ Moore. But we would recommend starting the Xavier Worthies, Troy Franklins, and Chris Godwins of the world ahead of Mr. Higgins. So again, thank you to Vanicream. They give guys no nonsense nonsense, fragrance-free care designed for sensitive skin because even guys need a little bit of help. Freeman, looking at those Kansas City Chiefs, again, a situation where they pretty much need to win out, but that said, maybe they can get it done. Hopefully, they'll need to use a little bit more Travis Kelce, someone who quietly has been having himself a pretty freaking great season.
Yeah, a really tough matchup for the Chiefs offense. The Texans defense is one of the league's best, but within that defense, they look to me fairly vulnerable at safety. So their number one strong safety, Jimmy Ward, is on PUP. Their number two strong safety, MJ Stewart, is on IR. So the number three strong safety, Jalen Reed, now he's dealing with a forearm injury and he's doubtful for this game. So the Texans are actually really thin in the secondary, and keeping in mind that Jalen Petrie plays now primarily as a slot corner, that means the Texans have only two active safeties on their roster, and one of them probably won't play this week. So I think that's creating a situation where Travis Kelce actually looks like the guy within this really tough matchup who could have a soft spot and could really kind of open things up for that offense. And then if Petrie moves back to safety, then I think that the question is who's covering Rashee Rice in the slot. So either way, I think one of these guys is going off. I think it's Kelce. He's going to be matched up with linebackers or like four-string defensive backs for a lot of the game. That is a setup that he should be able to exploit.
And again, already tight end 4 in PPR points per game on the season, only behind Tucker Kraft, Brock Bowers, and of course, Trey McBride. Moving on to some AFC East action. We got the New York Jets, Jets hosting the Dolphins, Miami 2.5-point road faves. Game total is starting to get a little bit low now at 40.5. I did want to give a shout out to Dolphins tight end, though, Darren Waller, someone who is one of only 3 tight ends this year with a passer rating north of 150 when targeted. Really has made more good things happen when he has been getting the opportunity to get the rock than not. Obviously came back from IR last week and played a very nice 69% of the routes, so pretty much already back in a full-time role. And now he gets this Jets defense that he already torched for 2 touchdowns back when they had Sauce Gardner earlier in the season. And it's just one of these situations, guys, where I break this down every week in my 10 Things article. I love these matchups we can find players with big-time man coverage splits against man-heavy defenses that also just kind of suck at playing defense, and that is what we have with the Jets. Usually we're used to seeing wide receivers actually be the ones with the more splits that, again, favor man coverage. But Darren Waller isn't your normal tight end. In fact, he lines up in the slot or out wide on 79% of his snaps as it is. So Darren Waller is my tight end 9. All these other alleged fantasy life rankers have him as tight end 13. I think those experts need to figure it out. So I would be starting Waller ahead of guys like Aronde Gadsden, Jawan Johnson, even Kyle Pitts and Zach Ertz. Again, that's not consensus with the rest of everyone else, but I am going out on a limb. I do think Darren Waller could perhaps be the skeleton key to get you guys through the fantasy playoffs. Jets, Steelers, Bengals, and Buccaneers. Pretty freaking great end of season stretch run there. Freeman, looking at those Jets. Look, we know Breece Hall is going to do Breece Hall things. He's been a rock solid RB2 this year, but maybe, just maybe, there's actually a wide receiver we can rely on here too.
Yeah, Adonai Mitchell has been really intriguing for the last few weeks. I'm like officially intrigued. I wouldn't start him in a guillotine league or anything like that, but in his 3 Jets games without Garrett Wilson, he has an obscene 60% share of the air yards, 100% of the end zone targets with a very legitimate 83% route rate. And then last week, he finally converted that usage into production, had 20.2 fantasy points on 102 yards and a touchdown. I don't think that was a fluke. Like, Mitchell is very much maximizing the opportunities that he is getting within that offense. And for at least one more week with Garrett Wilson on IR, I do think we see Adonai Mitchell have a really great opportunity ahead of him going against the Dolphins, who in terms of like drop back success rate, number 32 in the league. So a great matchup he has.
Guys, 3 more Week 14 matchups to get to. First, though, a quick word to our friends over at Cuso's Cuts. If you guys have been checking out the Fantasy Life show throughout the season, first of all, thank you. But you also might remember our Cuso's Cuts campaign with no bad beats equaling no bad meats. And we are once again teaming up with Cuso's to, again, get you guys a chance to, unfortunately, submit your bad beat stories from the playoffs. But hey, actually get some free Cuso's all-natural seasoning, sauces, and more for the cause. So we actually have a QR code, again, that you can scan right now to go ahead and submit your bad beat stories. And again, we're sorry that whatever happens in the future, in fact, did happen to you. and it will be painful, but at least you can walk away with some free Cuso's all-natural seasonings, sauces, and more. Can't say enough good things about these. I had the opportunity to actually use them on my chicken and steak throughout this season, and it really has taken my grilling game to another level. So again, submit your stories today by scanning the QR code here or find the link in the description. We got the Raiders hosting the Denver Broncos. Denver riding high with a 9-game winning streak at this point. These boys don't know how to lose, and accordingly, they are 7.5-point road favorites. Game total down there 40.5. But speaking of those Broncos, I do worry, guys, that the Troy Franklin kind of wide receiver one season in Denver is coming a bit to a halt. Looking at last week, he had just a 67% route rate. That was his lowest mark since week one. Don't think it's a coincidence that we actually saw Pat Bryant have his highest route rate of the entire season. And again, just a season low 3 targets for Troy Franklin. So I know it's tough to get in the minds of these NFL coaches and figure out why they're doing what they're doing and from a personnel standpoint. But I think part of it is just the fact that Franklin really hasn't made much out of his opportunities all season long. Again, the volume has gotten there, but on 16 targets thrown at least 30 yards downfield, Franklin has only caught one of them. And it happened all the way back, I think, in week 3 against the Colts on a scramble drill, for crying out loud. Wasn't even a design shot play. So again, just hasn't been great. Not saying you have to completely bench him, but he is just our wide receiver 36, ahead of guys like Xavier Worthy, Jaden Higgins, and Jordan Addison. However, that is behind the Chris Godwins, Romeo Doubs, and Brian Thomas Jr.'s of the world. Freedman, looking at the Raiders, you've been saying a lot of nice things so far, which I appreciate, man. You called the wet blanket for a reason, but it's probably time to get that wet blanket out when we're talking about Ashton Jeanty here.
Yeah, I try to pretend to be positive, but I just can't do it with Ashton Jeanty. And I'll just say, looking at this game in general, the projection model, we have this at 38.4. So I'm on the under. I'm down on this game overall, and that extends to Ashton Jeanty. And look, I've been saying since the preseason, since the offseason, that I'm fading Ashton Jeanty. I don't know why I would stop now. A month ago, when the Raiders played the Broncos, Jeanty had 19 carries and 5 targets and scored touchdowns. That's great. But he had only 63 yards, and that yardage mark is right in line with a typical gain for him. And it's a coin flip any game as to whether he scores a touchdown, which is actually impressive considering how bad the Raiders' offense is. And Jeanty has gotten 8 targets in each of the past 3 games, so that gives him an artificially high floor in PPR. But it's the all-important Week 14. If you are playing for anything this week, you cannot trust Ashton Jeanty in your lineup because 60 scoreless yards, even 40 scoreless yards, is well within the range of outcomes. Of course, the bad news is that if you drafted Jeanty this week, you're probably not playing for anything anyway. So lost season for him. You can't trust him, but at least I'll say in Dynasty and Keeper leagues, he's someone I would want to buy low.
He's been good with his opportunities on his own. It's just you kind of need an offensive line scoring environment to truly boom in fantasy. So top 5 numbers, guys, in terms of what he's done breaking tackles, but obviously not quite been enough to truly boom in fantasy land. Moving on to Monday Night Football, we got the Los Angeles Chargers, I guess, hosting the Eagles. I'm guessing there's going to be more green in the crowd anyway, but regardless, Philly's sitting as 3-point road favorites. Game total at a lowly 40.5 here. Probably getting Omarion Hampton back, though. Mr. Ride or Die coming in to hopefully save some fantasy season. We did get a report from CBS Sports' Matt Zenitz that, again, it's currently viewed as likely that Hampton will be able to return to action for Monday. The problem is, guys, if we remember the first 2 weeks of the year, it wasn't the Omarion Hampton workhorse, show going on. It was actually more of a split with him and Najee Harris. And then Najee got hurt, so then Hampton took over. But I just wonder if they can truly bench Kamani Vidal and go back to that 80-90% snap rate because the guy's been playing well. I mean, 3 games with 100-plus yards. Last week, he was getting a ton of his work after contact and making him forcing a bunch of missed tackles. And just when they asked Greg Roman last week about this potential split, he said he did think it was going to be more of a 1-2 punch. So yeah, I do think Hampton will be the one in that scenario, but I would like to wait and see Hampton's role for a week before I get too carried away in the ranks. So if Kamani Vidal, again, is in fact going to be pushed to the backside and we do see Hampton return and get his usual start, I'm going to rank him in that RB17 to RB19 range. If you want to move him ahead of an Ashton Jeanty, I think that's fine. I will be having him behind Quinshon Judkins, though, and I think it's kind of a toss-up with guys like RJ Harvey and Jaylen Warren. So Kamani Vidal, more of an RB3 with Jordan Mason and Kenneth Gainwell. Would try to avoid starting him if I could, if and when Hampton is back. So also, got to see if Justin Herbert's going to be out there. You guys don't need me to tell you if it is going to be the Trey Lance experience that is going to be downgrades for all pass catchers involved. Meanwhile, Freedman with those Eagles, things are going great for A.J. Brown recently, and that's about it in Philly.
Yeah. I mean, the AJ Brown thing is just so interesting. So he missed week 8 with the hamstring injury. He had the bye in week 9. And then in week 10, I think maybe still because of the hamstring, he had a reduced role in the offense. But in the 3 games since then, 37% target share, 40% air yard share, a 50% end zone share, and he's converted that into 291 yards and 3 touchdowns receiving on 33 targets. He's back to looking like A.J. Brown. And then Dallas Goedert. I'm not really excited about anyone else within this offense, but it is worth pointing out the Chargers are number 32 in defensive pass DVOA against tight ends. I wouldn't want to start him in like a guillotine league or anything like that, especially because he's done almost nothing in the 4 games since the week 9 bye, 17 targets, 114 yards receiving, but he still has an 89% route rate over that span. He still has 9 yards per target over the past 5 years with Jalen Hurts as the quarterback, and the matchup is advantageous. I'll say this is at least like a decent spot for a bounce back.
Moving on to the last game, Freedman. Again, we saved the worst for last here on the Fantasy Live show. We got the Browns hosting the Titans. They should flex this game to Nickelodeon or AMC or something like that. Cleveland sitting as 4-point home faves. Game total 33.5, guys. That is one of the lowest I can ever freaking even remember at this point. So I will say, though, look, Titans, do not start them, okay? Don't do it. Now, I could end that right here, and I think that'd be acceptable, but I found a really cool stat today, all right? It's Wednesday. I had Mad Men reruns going on. That's probably why I said AMC. Shout out, but I have my wiener dogs hanging out on the couch. Vibes were high in the Hartitz household. Here's my stat for you, okay? The 2020 leader in all-purpose yards. That includes everything. Derrick Henry. Next, Jonathan Taylor. Next, Josh Jacobs, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley. The 2025 leader in the NFL in all-purpose yards, Chimere DK. The man's a baller. Number 1 in punt return yards. Number 1 in kick return yards. He's been okay receiving. Is that flawed because the Titans give up a lot of touchdowns and he gets a lot of kick returns? Absolutely. But hey, shout out to Chimere DK. Don't start him, though, unless it's a return league. Freedman, looking at the Cleveland Browns. Quinshon Judkins maybe actually has an opportunity to get going here as a home favorite. What a time to be alive.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say 33.5 as the game total. That's too high. Like that's such a low number, and it just feels still too high. We have this projected at 31.1 in the game model. But even with that said, Quinshon Judkins, amazingly, a home favorite. The Browns offense has looked slightly more functional with quarterback Shedeur Sanders. The Titans are number 4 in the largest fantasy boost allowed to running backs. I mean, it could actually be a worse setup for a guy playing in a game that has the week's lowest total. So Quinshon Judkins, if you have him, yeah, maybe you start him this week. You actually can maybe get away with starting him, and it wouldn't be a terrible decision.
Again, Titans actually haven't been too bad against the run. Jeffrey Simmons, Devondre Sweat, 2 of PFF's better interior defenders. Graded against the run, but again, only so much you can do. And Quinshon Judkins, man, honestly been one of the more impressive rookie running backs regardless. So anyway, guys, that is going to do it for us. I do invite you to check out, though, again, Freedman's NFL betting game model on Fantasy Life. I know my man's been grinding it and has had some very nice success so far. Again, you can check that out at fantasylife.com. But until then, good luck setting those lineups, and we hope you guys have a great rest of your day. So if you like the show, then please like the show. Hitting that subscribe button always helps as well. So for Freedman, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, take care, everybody.